I just go in and I bring my heart and I bring my body and I bring my mind. And then I try to make life out of this text, and I try to connect with the people around me. And if they're good people and if I can connect with them, then it's something, because then it's real in that moment, and that's all I can do.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Katja Herbers is an actor. She sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work.
What is your entry point for a new character? Like, do you have a typical way in?
Well, it all starts with the writing, right? So I can't say that I'm someone who understands my own technique in a way that I can explain what I do exactly, or that I find it, but I'm going to try to get over this as we talk about this, because I sometimes don't find it that interesting when actors talk about their choices, or I just prefer to not know much about actors, because it's nice to have a certain mystery.
Yes.
It kind of kills me a little bit when,
Yes.
when you sometimes now you see big stars who've won Oscars do like jumping jacks on Instagram. I'm like, please don't do that. You know what I mean? So I like this mystery, but I also really like this podcast. And I do think that what you just described is your fear of, maybe over explaining what you need from an actor as a director, and thereby killing or just destroying something inside them that they're actually not going to give you a better performance. I think that happens very often. And I think now that I'm a little bit older and further along in my career, it happens to me less because I know how to not listen, which is a great tool. And also I know how to stroke a lot of men's egos and make them think that it's their idea, or something, so we can all feel good about something. But just as a way in, I guess I try to find an emotional arc, like what drives someone? What are they afraid of? What do they need? Like very basic things. And then I just try to, sometimes it's very physical. Like I come from the theater, also Dutch and German theater, that isn't so, not as naturalistic as most film. So sometimes we'd start something with, a posture or something and just figure out how someone moves, and a character would come from that. I think with the kind of acting that I do in America, I'm Dutch, by the way. It's naturalistic mostly. And so I bring in, I guess I try to just put in my heart into whoever this person is.
Yeah.
I try to fight for something.
That, I guess, is a really good constant action, right? Fighting. It keeps you active. Yeah,
I think that's it's also a little bit of the American cliche, maybe, that we all need to be winners.
Yes.
I think in European culture, we are way more comfortable with watching losers and still finding that interesting. I think in America, we really need to see people succeed.
Yes.
I like people who are very flawed, and I also like people when they're a bit desperate, because it just asks for, can allow for bigger and bolder choices. But fighting is good. I guess everyone's fighting for something, right, in life. That's good. Then I like fighting and losing. I don't necessarily need to win.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably much more interesting to play a loser, right? I mean, just in terms of what you get to play.
Maybe, yeah, but I guess they would need to have to get up all the time again and try again and fall flat on their face.
Right,
maybe now it's a comedy, which is really fun.
So this is something I don't think I've asked outright to people who are not American actors who have yet made it here in America. Is it common, when you know English as well as you do, to, as you are deciding, I want to be an actor, actually professionally, do you start to have this focus on being successful in your country as opposed to being successful in America, or does one lead to another? Like, is this something that you were having to try and figure out as a young person? Which one of those to kind of focus on, or did it all lead together?
No, it definitely did not. I did have the thought from a very young age, which is why my English is I can play, with an American accent. Not when I don't, like now you'll probably hear it because I don't have any lines written for me. But I used to, from a very young age, study this accent because I had it in my head that I wanted to act in America because all the movies and TV that I was seeing was from there. And I thought, okay, I want to be a part of that. But as for me, I guess some European actors are in a very successful European film or something, and then they get asked to be in an American film. I was never in such a film. So I basically just started over at 32 in America. And it was like, nobody. It's like I didn't have a career. So, or I hadn't done what I had done in Holland. I was just absolutely nobody when I had a bit of, people knew a little something that I did or something.
Yeah.
It's not a sad story at all. It's actually really fun. It just made that I felt like I did my 20s twice or something.
Yeah. But what is sad about that story is the lack of insight by the people that make things into like looking into somebody that's coming into the room next and see that maybe they might have a bunch of skills in another country that might be useful to know when you're trying to cast something instead of being like being like, this is a new person. They just started acting at 32.
Well, people do like new people, right? So that's
right.
They're always trying to figure like who's the next something.
Right.
So that's fine. And then I guess the fact that I had led movies and like theater shows meant that I could audition kind of well. I think it all plays together. I just didn't get like a jump off point of a great movie that won an Oscar or something.
Right. And is it true that this role in Evil was just given to you, that you didn't really audition for it?
Yeah, it's true. They did want me to, they wanted me to read for the studio and the network or something. But I kept telling them I wouldn't do it. Which is like, no is just such a powerful word. I was doing a movie here in Holland at the time. And I was just very busy. And I also thought the scene that they wanted me to do was a scene that I was most definitely going to fail at and not be able to do well because it was one with one of the demons like being over me that wasn't actually there. So now you're acting,
Right.
So I didn't. And then they were like, okay, well then maybe we'll offer it to you pending a meeting with the Kings. And so then the meeting was really nice and we connected very nicely. And they did see all my work. So it wasn't out of the blue. Yeah. And they actually also saw some of my Dutch work, the Kings. They watched they needed somebody who was able to bring some lightness to this sometimes very dark world. So they watched some of I kind of come from comedy in Holland. So they watched a few movies that I was in that were one that was kind of slapsticky and one that was like a romantic comedy, which was kind of stupid. But so I think that helped them. And then they asked me to chemistry read with Mike Coulter. And I again said, yeah, I'm not doing that. And then they were like, okay, well, fuck it. Here you go.
How could no work so many times? Like, I can understand maybe no working once, like on a fluke. You just keep using no.
Well, I really kind of like, I knew I was going to lose the part if I went because I was super tired. I was shooting this indie. I was shooting like 16 hours a day. I was exhausted. Then I was going to have to fly in on a whim, come back to film here. I think I was doing like rain shoots at night. I was just so tired. And I also thought, I know I can do this, but I'm going to fail if I go. And here's my show reel, and here's all the stuff I've done. And if you like me, then do it. Sometimes auditioning is also a little bit silly, because I do think like auditioning is not how it's going to be on the day at all. And so one of the things that I said no to was that that reading, which I've never done, but I have friends who've done it for the studio and the network, where you're in a theater. Now you're in a theater,
which makes no sense. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of absurd because also if you have theater background, you're going to, you know what that is, but they're filming you and it's on a screen.
Right.
I don't know. I just thought,
so dumb.
I don't want to do it. Now I kind of wish like maybe I had done it, because then I at least have that experience. Could have been kind of funny. But I'm also kind of sure that I wouldn't have gotten it. So there you go.
But were you worried? Because actors have talked about this, where they've been offered a role and they didn't really audition. Then this weird kind of insecurity comes in on day one, where they're like, oh, these people haven't actually seen my version of this yet. Was that a worry that came in?
No, somehow no, because I did feel very connected to that character quite quickly, and I was able to prep it. Yeah, no, I just felt connected to the material and the character, and I didn't have that. I did have with Westworld. I remember that's something I auditioned for. I remember on the first day I was terrified that I was going to get fired. I was terrified that they were going to like see me or something and go like, wait, did we cast her? We didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Like I've had that. For some reason with Evil, I didn't have that. Although I did think like during the camera test is when they're just looking at your face, right? And like how do we like this person's face and look to the left, look to the right? That makes me very uncomfortable because then I'm not acting. So now I'm just being looked at like and then you start to think stupid things like, oh my God, am I decent looking enough so that anyone will want to look at me on a TV screen?
Yeah.
And now I have to be a lead of a show, and what does that mean? So that made me very insecure. But then the actual acting becomes active, and I don't really suffer from knock on something, but like from imposter syndrome, because I just don't have that really.
I'm just imagining if I was going to be the lead of a show and I really connected with the character, I would still have this feeling like, I wonder if I'm putting all this work into it and the showrunner has an entirely different idea of this. And when are we going to come to a crossroads of this? Like, I would be so worried about going down this road of feeling comfortable without being in touch entirely with that person's idea of this. And I can see how this thinking is actually counterproductive to what the actor needs to do. They need to feel complete ownership of the character. And that will actually be what the showrunner wants if they're a good showrunner. But I can still imagine how this would be a problem for me. How do you avoid that?
Well, when I talked to the Kings, Robert and Michelle, over Skype when I was here in Holland, I did feel like we had we laughed at each other's jokes. Like we genuinely laughed at each other's jokes. So I knew like, oh, okay, we got a similar sense of humor. I just connected with them and I felt they connected with me. And so, I'd love to say that I was very worried about that, but I really kind of wasn't. And I was also maybe at the fuck it stage of my career where I was like, I'm just a pretty content person, maybe in general. And I count my blessings. So I thought like, okay, well, if somebody doesn't want me, that's fine. Like, somebody else will want me, or I don't know. I'm here to give. I give a lot. I put my whole heart and body and everything into something. Sometimes I think like maybe I give too much because it's also very exhausting, but it's the only way I understand how to do it. And so I feel like that's a lot. I bring that. I bring all of me. And so if that's not enough, like I can't change that.
Yes.
So, and I think maybe sometimes people are like, people who have certain feeling scared of failing or something has to do with, obviously I'm scared to fail, but not in a way where I sabotage myself, where I think, I'm going to not prepare 100% so that if I do fail, I don't have to actually own the fact that I am not good enough or whatever. I don't mean to sound like overly confident because I'm really not, but these aren't my kind of worries. I just go in and I bring my heart and I bring my body and I bring my mind. And then I try to make life out of this text and I try to connect with the people around me. And if they're good people and if I can connect with them then it's something, because then it's real in that moment, and then that's all I can do.
I'm imagining the experience of filling in backstory for this character, either consciously or unconsciously, or even just an emotional history that's not necessarily on the page, that actors kind of have to do, whether it's a lot or just a little bit that they're not even aware of. I'm imagining the experience of like getting to episode 20 and reading something in a script that kind of changes that emotional history. Must be a kind of a crazy, kind of frustrating, and yet, oh, this is kind of what I need, but now I have to change. Now, this changes my approach to her now. Talk a little bit about that. Like, have you ever come across that? Is this just stuff that is just feeding you, or is it stuff that's like, oh my God, this is frustrating because I was just playing this like this whole time. But I'm just so curious about that moment of like realization of like, okay, this has to change.
Well, one director, one theater director I work with quite a bit in Belgium and in Germany, his name's Johan Simons. He said something really interesting to me, which was during rehearsals, he would constantly just ask me to be someone else. But because he said people are a myriad of people. Nobody's any one thing.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
So in building a character, he wasn't that interested in a very understandable through line. He was more interested in like shards of who these people were, and then trusted the audience. It's also a way to treat your audience as, an intelligent audience to make sense of the behavior. So that's not really something that worries me. I mean, I do have a funny story about a director who once thought that he'd kept it a secret from the person who was the spy in the story that they were in fact the spy. He thought that he could have never gotten this brilliant performance from this actor had he told this actor that they were in fact the spy. And then we were all sitting down at like in the green room, and they were all there. And then he said, "No, the casting director told me that I was the spy." And it was like, and so it was just great. So I don't believe in treating your actors like dummies. Right. I don't believe in, maybe unless you're working with amateurs, right? Which maybe then you're manipulating people. If you're working, if you've cast people who have technique and are intelligent, and just the people who you want to work with, if they're professionals, like, please don't keep information from us. Like, it's just stupid. That's a little silly. I find that a little silly. And then the other thing that I find hard, maybe that I find the biggest challenge in working, is when you feel like a director thinks that they have to do it all, and that they're like God, and they're like the creative whatever, and they're going to have to tell everyone, not just the actors, but also the TP, also, just everyone, how to do their jobs. When I think what a good director is somebody who uses the creative forces from every single person on a set, and then you can all make something together. Like many people's creative energies together is obviously more than one person's. So, and I find it hard when directors try to like micromanage what an actor does. It's just not. It's all, again, maybe great if you're working with amateurs, not great if you're working with people who, every take try to figure out something else. Right. Who are like on some kind of creative flow when they're acting, so that the behavior is real, who don't anticipate what they're going to do. Something might actually come up in a take that they had no idea was going to happen. So if you tell an actor beforehand, like, hey, on that line, it might be good if you, I don't know, whatever, pick up that glass or start crying or whatever it can be. I'm like, why would you do that? It just makes the world so much smaller. And I think that's a bit silly. But for some actors and some directors, maybe that's a great way. Again, I think it's more like working with amateurs, which can lead to brilliant performances and great films, obviously.
Absolutely, yes.
And
There was an article, or I guess an interview with you, where you were talking about the confession scene in the end of season 2, and you actually said, "I work best when someone leaves me alone." Meaning the director, I guess, and the director knew that and kind of left you alone. But I want to know, like, because you said that this in the beginning of the interview, it's almost like, I guess anything that is said is going to have to be either ignored or translated into something else that you can use, right? I mean, like,
totally,
that's it, right? So it's like, it's probably best to just, realize that she needs to be left alone and can get there.
Well, or not. Like, please speak up if I'm like going in the entire wrong direction, or if you don't like it. But I think if you start off without looking at what a person has to offer, what their own creative impulse is, if you start off with talking during a rehearsal or saying, like, I think the scene is this, then you, again, you present yourself as God, and you're not working with what other people might have thought of. And I always think of this, Tommy Schlamme, who I work with on Manhattan, who's just the most wonderful director and a great, great person. And he once gave someone a book he said, this is the best book about directing. And it was a book by a psychiatrist, Yalom. I don't know how you pronounce the name in English, but Irvin Yalom. It's called Love Executioner. It's a beautiful book. You should read it.
Yeah.
He says, this is the best book about directing because this psychiatrist, who in the book you see different chapters on different patients that he has, and he describes these patients' therapy in quite a big detail. But in every chapter, he learns as much from the patient as the patient learns from him. And he says that's what a good director is. A good director learns as much from his actors as the actor learns from the director.
Yes.
And so I think you have to have curiosity in the people who you've cast. If you don't have that, like, why do you cast them? I don't know. Just go make animation or something. I don't know.
Right.
I think it often comes from insecurity, because the very good directors, maybe I mean, I haven't worked with Fincher, and I know he's extremely meticulous. That's something else. He has a huge artistic vision and he knows exactly what he wants. I would love to work with him. I'm all for it. Yeah. But if you're like just making television, if people coming in, and if they then come in and start to, sort of dictate what you have to do, it's just, for me, it's counterproductive. Yeah. I'd love to hear what other actors think. I will listen to your podcast and find out.
That's it. There's a nice library of this, and lots of Fincher talk too. There of all different kinds of various frustrations and loves of him. Mm-hmm. Here's a question I'll probably cut out because it's unfair to ask. I don't think that this is true of all the great actors. I don't see you acting. Like, I sometimes try to be aware, like, let me try and see her acting. It looks absolutely effortless. There are some people you're like, you almost see them acting, but you love it anyway.
Totally.
I'm basically asking you, why am I seeing effortlessness in you?
I mean, I think I have no idea.
Yeah.
I myself don't like feeling that although sometimes, like, I'll approach something very musically and it's definitely very technical what I'm doing, Mm-hmm. Or even with that confession scene that you mentioned, like, I did have an idea for a physicality of it, which was kind of like what you see people do in grieving people. So they sometimes like hit themselves. And I did think like something like that has to, so wow. So I'm definitely putting in a lot of effort to make it good. But then I don't feel honest if I feel the effort while I'm doing it. I need to feel that it's just coming out of me naturally and that I'm coming up with it in the moment, which is also why directors who tell me exactly what they want when kills me a little, because then there's a roadmap instead of something that can just be have a different shape each take. Yes.
Is there some way that, like, if they really needed you to pick up that glass, is there some way for that? Oh,
I'll pick up the glass. I'm fine. I'm do all that kind of stuff all the time.
Well, sure. But I'm saying, like, if I wanted to not tell you to pick up the glass because I didn't want to have this through line ruined.
Oh, well, picking up the glass is really the wrong example that I gave there, because picking up the glass is just a thing that you need to do or put it down. And, you know, you need to like do continuity, and that's all totally fine. What I object to is like before a rehearsal, before you see what an actor has to offer, that you come in with your idea of what the scene is, thereby sort of overriding some freedom in their brain to come up with stuff with your, you know, probably a bit smaller idea than what the actor has been working on, because they've been internalizing it.
That's right.
You know,
right.
So that's kind of like, please just let an actor rehearse it.
Yeah.
And rehearsing on our set is just, you know, blocking it. Basically, we have almost no rehearsal time. And then I'm not opposed to notes at all. I'm just opposed to not paying attention to what your actor brings.
Yes.
And not using that to your advantage to make something beautiful, because I think the authenticity, if an actor is able to bring that, that's worth everything. Yes.
It's taken me so long to come to this, because even like something I just filmed recently that there was so many technical issues and so many space issues that I just immediately just told them where to stand that would be best for the camera, because there was no other real way to doing it. And I still see this tension in the scene that's wrong. What I'm saying is, like, if I had just let them do it wherever they wanted to do it, it would have been a little bit worse for the camera, but I wouldn't have that tension in there, and I would like it would get me what I needed.
Well, don't you think like telling someone where to stand, that's really quite all right.
I don't know, but you're making me think, and other actors have, the very first thing should be them just finding it. If it doesn't work entirely, you know, then you can. But that agency at the very beginning is so important, right? As a currency, as a creative currency.
Yeah, maybe. So maybe like what you could have done is like, okay, let's just run it through
see
and
how
see
it feels.
what happens organically.
Yeah, go
now
where you want.
Then you say like, do you think it would be possible to be there while doing what you were doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
But it's so interesting that like people wouldn't realize by now that this kind of creativity, this kind of ownership of space is so important for actors, like to ignite their imagination about this character that they've been thinking about for days or weeks. You know what I mean? And they've been thinking about this scene.
Yeah, like with the confession scene, like it was very important that I was left alone, because in order to be connected to my emotion in that way, if I would have had to have dealt with, you know, whatever the director thinks that should be, like, how am I going to access this? So I'm coming in with all my stuff.
Yes.
And Alethea Jones, who directed that episode, who's wonderful, and who I'd worked with on a previous episode, or the elevator episode, which was also a very good episode, I thought. She really she made that space for me. And then Mike Coulter, who plays David Costa, and we kind of just found that blocking together, also within the physicality, because we knew that we were going to have to end up kissing, but it was, how do you get to the hug? And so we kind of just blocked that out together. And then what Alethea did, which I think what a good director does, is like she figures out, how do I set up the camera in a way that also tells this story?
Yes. Yeah.
But if she had come in and told me, so you're very upset that you've killed a man and now you're here and your white privilege is, and I'm like, what?
Yeah. Or
you think I don't know that? You know, you'll be surprised how many people will say, like, so remember last season you've killed someone. I'm like, yeah, I remember. Well, sometimes you gotta translate what a director means by something. And I've gotten better at that, I think. I used to work with a Dutch director, a theater director. I did a lot of Chekhov and Schnitzer plays with him. And he's the kind of director who will actually speak your lines for you. Whoa. And you have to mimic how they sound. I'm not kidding. And a lot of actors go absolutely stir crazy from this guy.
Yeah.
He has, however, perfect pitch for the emotional through line of people.
Right.
And whatever he says is so entirely great and so entirely complex and wonderful that it really, really works. If you've established a certain chemistry and a certain language with a director, which can really be anything, because this director who told me exactly what to do, when to touch someone, how to speak, is one of my favorite directors ever.
Interesting.
So it differs, right? And I would end up feeling very free within the plays that we made together, because also what it did, which was great, was it forced me outside of my own, intuition. I was now in his brain. Mm-hmm. It was just I'd love to do it again. I loved that.
That's so interesting.
But he could do it because he's a genius.
I was just going to say, the important part there is that he was right about this emotional thing and pitch and everything exactly like the way it should, it should be.
Yeah, and then the funny thing is, like, some actors would mimic what he did, and they would do it right, but they wouldn't bring, their bodies, their hearts, their heads, they wouldn't be able to ground it. And he'd be like, no, that doesn't sound right. And then he'd change it.
Whoa.
Because he needed it to. So if you couldn't translate it to be in your body, it would hear like off pitch to him, and he would just start. So many actors committed suicide on his.
But that sounds like there's some kind of genius to that.
There is some kind of genius to that, but it's also slightly crazy. That you don't translate that into something else sometimes if you see that it's clearly not working for an actor.
Yeah, but that's such an interesting example that you're giving, because you would think, based on what you're saying, that wouldn't work for you because of how restricted it is. Yes. Wait, let's talk about, before we leave, let's talk about the law firm of Shuck, Gray, Crocco, and Knapp, which are your characters' children in...
I love that you call them the law firm.
Because it sounds like a law firm.
That's so good.
Shuck, Gray, Crocco, and Knapp. I want to go there when I have my car injury. I am fascinated by these kids, and I haven't seen season 3, so I'm sure they're in college now. But you rarely see kids acting like kids in things. And I'm imagining this must be a really great for an adult actor to be working with these kids. Am I right? I mean,
it's wonderful.
Yeah, it must fuel wonderful. Your work.
It does. It really, I love them so much. And I think that testament to how this is written, they're like, when you see in the script, it just says daughters, and then you see their lines. And it's all talking together. And then on the day, we'll like divide who says what. And they'll improvise some stuff with it often. Right. And Robert King grew up, I think, with 7 siblings, and so this is what it sounded like in his house.
Yes. And it just sounds real. Like that's what I respond to. It just sounds like the way it doesn't sound like it's not getting old with like, oh, this just sounds manufactured.
No, it's also, I think, how we behave on set, and how sort of free they're allowed to stay. If there is somebody who starts micromanaging them, for instance, also not a great idea. Right. So like, we keep it loose. You got to keep it loose.
Yeah. Is there something that you do when you're not working that kind of feeds this creative part of you, this inner actor, that just, kind of nourishes the part of you that needs to play?
It's so hard. That's really a struggle. I mean, I like helping friends with self-tapes, because then at least I get to act a little bit. I like going, like yesterday, for instance, I went to a reading of a friend who has a new play. I like that. And then just talking about how, and I also like thinking about how to start a revolution around climate change and get rid of the Supreme Court. But I don't think that has to do with acting at all.
It's a certain fuel. It's a certain fuel.
I don't know. It's just that we're in a difficult situation. So I joined Extinction Rebellion. Everyone who listens should look it up. It's a great organization, and we do need to save our home, save our planet. And so I do think like in the times when I'm not working or I'm just auditioning for things, to keep myself sane, I do a bit of activism.
Katja Herbers, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.